The heart monitor flatlined. That single, piercing tone cut through the emergency room noise like a blade through silence. A small girl lay motionless on the cold tile floor of San Francisco General Hospital, her pink jacket soaked dark, her white sneakers pointing in opposite directions. Emma Caruso, age 6, was not breathing. Nora Morgan was the first to move. She was not supposed to be there. She had come at 11:19 p.m. on a December night, her worn grey coat still dripping melted snow onto the linoleum, clutching a printed-out job posting for nighttime janitorial work. $78 remained in her pocket. $78 to stretch until the foreclosure notice came due. 7 days. She had walked to the hospital through the freezing rain because the bus fare cost $1.50 she could not afford to lose. Nora dropped to her knees beside the small motionless form without hesitation. Her hands found the child's ribcage. Small. So small. The rest of the room seemed to dissolve, the fluorescent hum, the rushing voices, the chaos of an emergency room at midnight melting into white noise. She began compressions. 1, 2, 3. Her voice steady despite her shaking hands, despite the fact that she had learned CPR from a YouTube video 3 years ago, despite knowing that she had nothing, could offer nothing, but this. 4, 5, 6. Across the waiting area, perfectly still in his tailored black suit, Aleandro Caruso watched. 6'2", built from controlled violence and carefully calibrated power, with dark eyes that had seen every human response to fear. His shirt lay open at the collar, revealing a silver chain and a chest scarred from a knife wound suffered at age 19. A scar that ran from temple to jawline caught the harsh overhead light. His hands, resting at his sides, were capable of commands that made men disappear. In 15 years, his men had never seen him shocked. In this moment, Aleandro was shocked. Not at the child on the floor, that was a separate horror, still processing, still unfolding. But at this woman. This stranger in a coat that had been restitched at the seams, kneeling with complete disregard for the stain spreading across the knees of her jeans, pressing life back into a small child's chest. No calculation. No hesitation. No wondering what she might gain or lose. Just action. 15. 16. 17. Nora's shoulders burned. Her breath came hard. She had seen her own mother die on a hospital floor 8 years ago, heart attack, no one nearby, the machine arriving too late by minutes that might as well have been hours. The memory lived in her muscle memory. It lived in her hands now, pushing, pushing, pushing. 28. 29. 30. A nurse arrived, then 2 more. One of them was shouting into a radio. Nora felt hands on her shoulders, gentle but firm, and she released the child to trained fingers and machines. She stood, trembling, stepping back into the crowd of the waiting room. No one asked her name. No one asked what she was doing there. The nurses were already moving, already working, already moving the small girl toward the trauma bay. Nora stood in her wet coat and soaked jeans and counted her heartbeats until they slowed enough that she could breathe like a normal person. That was when she felt his attention settle on her like a weight. Aleandro Caruso was walking toward her, and Nora did not recognize him as the kind of man who walked toward people unless something was about to change. His lieutenants, Sergio and Theo, both broad-shouldered men in grey suits that cost more than her monthly rent had ever been, exchanged a look across the room. Neither had ever seen him approach a stranger. Neither had ever seen him vulnerable enough to move without calculation. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere deeper in the hospital, a machine beeped its mechanical rhythm. Nora's hands, still trembling, were wet with melted snow and a child's saliva, and she wanted to hide them, but she had nowhere to put them. He stopped 3 feet away. Close enough that she could smell him, expensive cologne and something underneath it, something like rain and stone. "You came here for work," he said. Not a question. Nora's throat dried. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, the kind of voice that did not repeat itself. The janitorial position. Midnight shifts. I saw the posting. Why did you stop? Aleandro's face went completely still. Stone-like. A hand emerged from his jacket and reached for his phone before the second scream ended. He spoke into it in Italian, rapid and clipped, then in English, "My mother. Emergency room. St. Mary said she was coming by ambulance." Where? Where is she? The answer came through the phone, and Nora watched comprehension hit him like a physical blow. His mother was not in this hospital. His mother was arriving at this hospital. And somewhere in the next 30 seconds, she would learn that her daughter-in-law, Emma's mother, had just flatlined in Trauma Bay 4 and was not coming back. Nora understood, in that frozen moment, that she had been the only person moving when everything else stopped. And that sometimes, one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. But she did not yet know how deep that change would cut, or what price she would pay for being someone who could not stand still while strangers died. The automatic doors at the entrance burst open. Rain swept in with a woman's voice, panicked and gasping, "My daughter. Emma Caruso. They said to come to emergency, my daughter." And behind her, assisted by a man in a dark coat, came an older woman. Silver hair pulled back. Elegant. Moving slowly, deliberately, breathing hard, her left hand pressed against her chest. Aleandro moved toward them. It was then that his mother collapsed, her knees buckling, her hand opening, the contents of her purse scattering across the wet floor. Pills scattered. A wedding ring. A photograph of a small girl in a pink jacket. No one was moving fast enough again. 6 hours earlier, the city was already freezing. November wind tore through the streets like a blade wrapped in ice, and Nora Morgan was walking 3 miles on foot because her car had been repossessed 2 months ago, and the bus fare was money she did not have. Her coat, a grey thing she had found at a charity shop in 2019, did not button anymore. She held it closed with one hand and kept the other in her pocket, fingers wrapped around the crumpled bills. $78. That was everything. That was rent, that was food, that was survival until Friday. The foreclosure notice was still taped to her apartment door when she left. She had not torn it down. Looking at it made her numb, and numb was better than afraid. Behind her, in the studio apartment on the 4th floor of the Riverside building, her daughter Emma sat on the bed coloring while her son Lucas ate cereal from a plastic bowl. Emma was 8 years old and already good at pretending everything was fine. Lucas was 5 and believed his mother when she said they were playing a game called Adventure Dinner. The radiator clanked. The pipes shuddered. Neither child asked where she was going because they already knew the answer: work. Work again. Nora had left a note on the refrigerator, held up with a magnet shaped like a strawberry. "Mrs. Chen from 4B will check on you at 9. I will be home before breakfast. Do not open the door for anyone except Mrs. Chen." She had kissed them both while they slept, pressing her lips to Emma's forehead, then Lucas's, breathing them in like a prayer, like someone preparing for a war they might not survive. The wind bit her face as she walked. The snow was not falling gently anymore. It was driving sideways, thick and relentless, accumulating on the sidewalk faster than the city could clear it. She passed the boarded-up laundromat on 5th. The closed restaurant. The pawn shop with the iron bars on the windows. She passed 3 people sleeping in doorways, wrapped in whatever fabric they had managed to find. She did not stop. She could not afford to stop, and she could not afford to look too long at their faces because they could have been her in 3 weeks, when the money ran out completely. The hospital appeared through the white haze like something rising from the ocean. St. Mary's. Lights blazing from every window. An ambulance passed her, heading toward the emergency entrance, lights flashing red and blue against the snow. She stayed on the public sidewalk, not wanting to get in anyone's way, not wanting to be noticed by security guards who might ask questions about why a half-frozen woman in a disintegrating coat was loitering outside a medical facility. At the reception desk inside, where the warmth hit her like a wall and her wet hair started dripping onto the linoleum, she asked about work. Night shifts. Cleaning positions. Anything at all. The receptionist, a woman with reading glasses on a chain, did not look up from her computer. "Fill out an application online," she said. "We are not hiring." Nora had already filled out 7 applications at 7 different hospitals. She had never heard back from any of them. But she stood there anyway, breathing in the antiseptic smell, letting the fluorescent lights burn away some of the cold from her bones. The waiting room was half full. An elderly man coughing. A mother with a sick toddler. A teenager with his arm in a sling. And in the corner, a small girl in a pink jacket, sitting beside an older woman, eating candy from a paper bag. Nora stood near the vending machines, pretending to consider her options. She had no money for vending machines. She was just trying to look like she belonged, like she was waiting for someone instead of waiting for her body to thaw enough to walk back home in the snow. Meanwhile, 32 blocks north, in an office on the 42nd floor of a building that reflected the city lights like a mirror, Aleandro Caruso received a phone call. His mother, Maria, had called to say she was not feeling well. Her chest felt tight. A pressure, like someone sitting on her ribs. Nothing serious, probably. But she was going to the hospital to get it checked. Aleandro had been reading financial reports. 2 pages of numbers indicating that his construction company, the legitimate one that everyone in the city knew about, had absorbed a $3.2 million contract. He set the papers down. "Which hospital?" he asked his mother. "St. Mary's." "I am already in the ambulance." He hung up without saying goodbye. That was not coldness. That was efficiency. That was the way you moved when you understood that time was a weapon and every second counted. He called Sergio first. "My mother is being taken to St. Mary's. Now." Then he was on his feet, moving through his office toward the elevator, his suit jacket, charcoal gray, $3,000, tailored in Milan, already being adjusted by his own hands. The elevator descended. 42 floors in 90 seconds. He did not breathe any differently. When he emerged onto the street, 2 black SUVs materialized from the underground parking garage as if they had been waiting for exactly this moment. Sergio and Theo were already in the back seat of the first one. They did not ask questions. Theo pulled into traffic without hesitation, his hand steady on the wheel, his eyes on the road ahead. The snow was getting worse. Visibility was dropping. But Theo drove like he had memorized every inch of this city, every turn, every light. Behind them, the second SUV followed at exactly the right distance, carrying 4 more men in charcoal suits and dark coats. This was how Aleandro Caruso moved through the world. Quietly. With intention. With the kind of presence that made other drivers pull out of his way without knowing why. Back at the hospital, the little girl in the pink jacket was getting restless. Her name was Emma, though Nora did not know that yet. She was 6 years old, visiting her grandmother, waiting while the older woman, who was Maria, though Nora did not know that either, used the bathroom. Emma had been given candy to keep her occupied. Hard candy. The kind that takes time to dissolve. Nora was still standing by the vending machines, her clothes still dripping melted snow onto the floor, when Emma's grandmother returned from the bathroom and settled back into the plastic chair beside her granddaughter. Maria was 73 years old. She had grey hair pinned back with a silver clip. She was wearing an elegant wool coat that probably cost more than Nora's monthly rent, and on her wrist was a watch that caught the fluorescent light and threw it back in little diamonds of reflection. Maria did not feel any better. If anything, the tightness in her chest had gotten worse. She pressed her hand against her heart and tried to breathe slowly, the way her doctor had taught her. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Breathe out for 4. But the pressure was not going away. It was spreading. Down her arm now. Into her fingers. Then Emma started choking. It was not loud. There was no dramatic gagging sound. Emma's candy had shifted position in her throat, and suddenly she could not breathe. Her eyes went wide. Her hand came up to her mouth. She tried to cough, but nothing came out except a thin, wheezing sound like wind through a crack in a window. The waiting room did not freeze all at once. It froze in stages. Maria's hand went to her granddaughter's back. The mother with the toddler turned her head. The old man coughing looked up. And Nora, standing by the vending machines, understood in that single second that no one else was moving fast enough. The receptionist was behind her desk. No security guard visible. No nurse visible. No one. Nora moved. She crossed the waiting room in 4 steps. She did not think about whether she belonged there or whether she had permission to touch this child or whether she was about to do something wrong. She simply moved the way a person moves when they see something dying and their body will not allow them to stand still. She got behind Emma and placed her hands above the child's stomach, and she pulled upward with all her strength. Once. Nothing came out. Twice. Still nothing. The pressure in Emma's chest was building. Her face was starting to change color. Turning purple. Turning blue. Turning into something that looked like drowning even though Emma was standing up. Nora pulled a 3rd time. Harder. Desperate. And the candy shot out of Emma's throat like a bullet. It skittered across the linoleum floor and hit the baseboard. Emma gasped. Gasped again. Pulled air into her lungs in great, shuddering inhalations. She started crying. Her grandmother pulled her against her chest, and tears started streaming down the older woman's face too. That was when everything changed. Not because Nora had done something remarkable, she was simply a person who could not stand still while a child died. But because the child she had just saved was Emma Caruso. And the woman she had saved was Maria Caruso, who was the only person in the world that Aleandro Caruso loved enough to feel. The automatic doors burst open. Rain and snow swept in together with a force that made everyone in the waiting room look up. 2 men entered first, scanning the space with eyes trained to find threats. Then Aleandro Caruso stepped through the entrance, his cashmere coat already carrying the city on its shoulders, water beading on the fabric like tears that refused to fall. His gaze moved across the waiting room. He was looking for his mother. Instead, he found a half-frozen woman in a disintegrating grey coat, still standing close to his granddaughter, her hand still outstretched, her eyes still fixed on the place where a child had almost died. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like machines counting down something precious. Nora's hands were still trembling when she sat at the corner table in Pearl's diner 3 days later, during her 15-minute break between the lunch rush and the afternoon collapse. She stared at the 5 $100 bills Aleandro had left on the hospital cafeteria table, folded now into the pocket of her apron, their edges worn from her touching them every hour like they might disappear. The money was real. The threat was also real. Douglas Hale had been waiting outside her apartment building last night, leaning against the stairwell entrance with the casual posture of a man who owned the space around him. He was 6'3", 240 pounds of controlled menace, with scarred knuckles and eyes that had stopped feeling anything years ago. When she tried to walk past, he grabbed her left arm just above the elbow, squeezed hard enough that she knew without looking there would be bruises shaped like fingers. "Been trying to reach you," he said. His voice came out like gravel dragged through tar. "I have nothing to say to you." She jerked toward the stairs. He held. "You think you can ignore me? You think filing police reports will help?" He laughed, a sound with no joy in it, just the sound of a man who had learned that consequences were negotiable. "I know every cop in the 6th precinct. They're not coming for me, Nora. They're not coming at all." His breath smelled like whiskey and cigarettes. Like 3 years of her life that she had spent trying to forget. "You owe me," he continued, his grip tightening until her fingers started to go numb. "For 3 years I supported you. Those kids. You beat me for 3 years." The words came out steady even though her body was shaking. "I owe you nothing." Something flickered across his face, anger, or maybe just the recognition that she was no longer afraid enough. "Rachel told me you're about to lose your apartment. $85,000 in 7 days. Where you gonna go?" Who's gonna help you? She twisted free, ran up the stairs without answering. Behind her, he called out, "I'll be seeing you real soon." Inside her apartment, Nora had locked the door, checked on Emma and Luca sleeping in their shared bedroom, and sat on the linoleum kitchen floor counting her remaining money. $78. The foreclosure notice was crumpled in her other pocket, the deadline printed in numbers so large they seemed to be screaming, 7 days. But what changed everything was that Sergio had been watching her building for 2 days on Aleandro's orders. He had photographed every second of Douglas's threat, the grip on her arm, the aggressive posture, the manner in which a man had cornered a woman with nowhere to run. Sergio had sent the images to his boss at 11:43 p.m., along with a single text, "The problem is back." Aleandro had not slept that night. Now, sitting at the corner table in Pearl's diner while the coffee maker hissed in the background and the bell above the door chimed with each customer, Nora heard the sound before she saw anything. An engine, expensive and controlled, pulling to a stop directly outside. Through the window, she watched a black SUV materialize from the San Francisco fog like something summoned from deeper water. Sergio stepped out first, surveying the street with the methodical attention of a man trained to identify threats. He held the passenger door open. Aleandro emerged in a tailored charcoal suit, the fabric so fine it caught light like water. His cashmere coat hung unbuttoned, worth more than 3 months of her rent, and his dark eyes moved across the street until they found the diner window. Found her. Nora's entire body went rigid. He entered like he owned the building, like he owned the entire block. The other customers sensed it immediately, the subtle shift in air pressure, the way conversation stopped mid-sentence, the way even the owner, Tony, straightened behind the counter. Aleandro walked directly to her table. Sergio remained near the door. Theo watched from outside, visible through the rain-streaked glass. "You didn't come to the hospital again," Aleandro said. He didn't sit down. He stood across from her with his hands in his coat pockets, his voice carrying the timbre of controlled authority, like a judge delivering a verdict. "I don't know what you mean." Nora's hands gripped the edge of the table. Around them, she felt the weight of every eye in the diner landing on their table, calculating, wondering. "My mother asked about you. She wanted to thank you properly." He leaned forward slightly. "I investigated why you might avoid that. I found out several things, Nora. I found 3 police reports against a man named Douglas Hale. All dismissed. I found hospital records. I found photographs of bruises that matched his knuckles. And I found that he has connections to 4 corrupt officers in the 6th precinct." She stood up abruptly. "We're done here. Sit down." The tone wasn't cruel. It wasn't even particularly loud. But something in its certainty made her sit back down as if the chair itself had pulled her down. "I also found out that you owe $85,000 in 7 days. That you're working 2 jobs and still starving. That you haven't bought yourself new shoes in approximately 4 years. His eyes moved across her face, reading her like a document. "And I found out that Douglas Hale told you he was watching you. That he told you he knows the police won't help. You shouldn't have. A man threatened a woman under my protection. That is my business now." Aleandro pulled out the chair across from her and sat down with the deliberate grace of someone accustomed to taking up space. "Here is what is going to happen. First, Douglas Hale will no longer be a problem. That is handled. Second, your foreclosure will be resolved. I've already contacted the bank." Nora felt her throat close. "I can't accept." "You can. And you will." His voice dropped, became intimate even though Sergio and Theo were watching, even though the entire diner had stopped pretending to eat. "Because the people who did this to you believed you were nobody. That belief needs to be corrected." The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows with sudden force. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pot clattered. The bell above the door chimed as someone entered, shaking water from their coat. "My mother was right about one thing," Aleandro continued. "Women like you, good women, they make a man want to be better. And better is dangerous in my world." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "But I've decided I don't care about the danger anymore." Rachel Dawson walked past their table exactly then, designer purse slung over her shoulder, her expression hardening when she saw Nora sitting across from Aleandro Caruso. Their eyes met for one fractional second, and in that second, Rachel understood that the woman she had deliberately humiliated 3 days ago, the one she had knocked coffee onto, the one she had left a cruel note for, was no longer unprotected. Was no longer nobody. Rachel's face went white. She left without ordering anything. "She'll spread word," Nora whispered. "About us. About this. Let her." Aleandro's hand finally touched hers, his palm warm against her cold skin. "Let everyone know. Because starting tonight, Nora Morgan, you belong to me. And I protect what is mine." Outside, the fog rolled thicker through the San Francisco streets, swallowing the black SUVs whole, carrying with it the sound of footsteps on wet pavement and the distant wail of sirens. Somewhere in the city, Douglas Hale was receiving a visit. Somewhere else, a phone call was being made to a bank. And in a small diner, a woman who had been invisible for so long was finally learning what it meant to be seen. The foreclosure notice sat on the kitchen counter like a tombstone, edges curled and yellowed from handling, the words blurring and sharpening as Nora Morgan's vision swam. 6 days had passed since the hospital. 6 days of waiting for Aleandro to call. 6 days of silence that felt like rejection disguised as mercy. Tomorrow at noon, the locks would change. The apartment would no longer be hers. She had counted her money 3 times that morning, hoping the numbers would shift, would multiply through sheer desperation. $78. That was all. The blizzard outside pressed against the windows like something alive and hungry, snow piling in drifts that swallowed the fire escape, visibility collapsing to nothing. The city had sealed itself in white. Somewhere beyond that wall of ice, San Francisco continued without her, people in warm offices, families in heated homes, a world that had never noticed she was falling. Emma coughed in the next room, a small, fractured sound that cut through Nora like a blade. She walked to the bedroom door and watched her daughter sleep, the 5-year-old's breathing shallow and quick. Lucas sprawled across the foot of the bed, thumb in his mouth, his 7-year-old body already showing the tension of knowing things were wrong. Nora had told them they were packing for an adventure. She had smiled when she said it. She had made it sound like a game. After they slept, after the apartment went silent except for the wind's howl, Nora stood at the window and let herself feel the weight of it all. The eviction. Douglas still circling, still hunting, his connections with corrupt officers making him untouchable. The shelters full in winter, every one of them places Douglas would find her. No car. No family. No way out that didn't end with her children waking up without a mother. The bathroom cabinet opened with a whisper. The bottle of sleeping pills sat on the second shelf, dusty, prescription from 2 years ago when insomnia had been her only problem. She held it in her palm. How easy it would be. How clean. How simple to just stop. To let the fighting end. Emma coughed again. Nora set the bottle down on the sink counter, her hand trembling. Not like this. She would not let her children wake to that silence. She sealed the cabinet door, walked back to the living room, and began writing a letter instead. To Aleandro Caruso, she wrote, her handwriting shaking across the paper. You saved your mother's life. And then you tried to save mine. I cannot let you. There are things about me you don't understand. There are people hunting me. A man named Douglas Hale who has decided I belong to him, and the police in this city are his friends. If I stay near you, I make you a target. I have decided to take my children and disappear tonight. Not to a shelter. Somewhere further. Somewhere he will never think to look. Meeting you made me remember what it felt like to be seen as human. That will be enough. Please don't try to find us. Some people are too broken to save. I am one of them. She sealed the letter. She addressed it in careful letters. She planned to mail it before she loaded the children into a taxi, before she crossed the bridge and drove inland with $300 she didn't have but would find some way to steal or beg. What she did not know was this: Sergio had been following Douglas for 6 days, documenting the stalking, the threats whispered outside her apartment building, the way Douglas laughed when the corrupt cops turned a blind eye. What she did not know was that Aleandro had watched the diner security footage at 2:13 in the afternoon, Douglas's hands around her throat, her body slamming against the counter, his voice screaming ownership and rage. The footage was 4 hours old. Aleandro had spent 4 hours deciding that some men did not deserve to live. That some men deserved something worse than death. At 8 p.m., as Nora sealed her goodbye letter, Douglas Hale sat in his apartment drinking bourbon from a crystal glass he had stolen from a woman years ago. He was thinking about Nora. Thinking about how she would break. How she would finally understand that running was pointless. His apartment door exploded inward. There was no announcement. No warrant read aloud. Just 12 men in black tactical gear moving like ghosts through the darkness, their footsteps synchronized and silent, their weapons drawn but unnecessary. Theo kicked Douglas's gun away before he even understood what was happening. Sergio appeared in the bedroom doorway, checking rooms with the efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times. Aleandro walked in last, unhurried, his footsteps measured and deliberate on the hardwood floor, the sound echoing through the space like a funeral bell. Douglas scrambled backward, his body hitting the wall, his mouth opening and closing around words that would not form. Who or what? You put your hands on Nora Morgan, Aleandro said. His voice was quiet. Controlled. So much more terrifying than shouting. You threatened her children. You marked her with bruises that will fade but matter forever. Douglas's instinct was to bluff, to reach for the connections he believed protected him. I know people. Cops in this city. You can't. Sergio dropped a folder on the floor. Photographs spilled across the carpet like a confession. Douglas's cop friends accepting envelopes of cash. Douglas's cop friends meeting with rival families. Douglas's cop friends destroying evidence. Years of corruption captured in high-resolution evidence, enough to bury them all in federal prison. They're being arrested right now, Aleandro said. FBI raid at dawn. You won't see them again. Douglas's face went grey. His hands shook. He collapsed onto the floor, trembling like a cornered animal, his voice breaking as he begged. Please. I'll leave her alone. I'll disappear. I'll go anywhere. Please? You're right about that last part, Aleandro said, standing. You are going to disappear. 2 men hauled Douglas to his feet. His legs would not support his weight. They dragged him toward the door as he screamed, his voice ragged and primal, echoing through the stairwell, down the hallway, fading into the night like a siren wailing into nothing. Aleandro did not watch him go. He stood in the apartment's darkness, looking at the bourbon glass on the table, the crystal that had belonged to someone else's victim, and he thought about mercy. How it was a luxury he had never been taught to afford. The next morning, federal agents arrived at Rachel Dawson's real estate office with warrants and handcuffs. They had been building their case for a week: fraud, tax evasion, bribes paid to city officials to approve developments in neighborhoods she had deliberately destroyed. Rachel's face went white when she understood this was not a negotiation. You have the right to remain silent, the agent said, clicking the cuffs shut around her wrists. Rachel screamed about injustice as cameras flashed. She screamed as they walked her through her office, past the assistants who would soon be job hunting, past the glass walls that had reflected her image 1,000 times. She screamed about lawyers and appeals and connections that suddenly did not matter. 40 years federal prison, the news anchor said that evening. Real estate mogul Rachel Dawson arrested in massive fraud scheme. Her assets frozen. Her empire collapsed. Her name synonymous with corruption and cruelty. Both villains, destroyed in a single night by a man who had learned long ago that true power was not measured in bullets but in patience. In evidence. In the systematic dismantling of everything someone believed protected them. Somewhere in the city, Nora Morgan was sealing her goodbye letter when Aleandro's phone buzzed. A text from Sergio, 2 words, both fallen. He read it twice. Then he set the phone down and walked toward the diner where she worked, where she was probably finishing her shift, where she was probably planning to disappear. What she did not know was that her letter would never reach him. That Theo was already waiting outside the diner, his black SUV idling at the curb, and Aleandro was already moving toward her with the single-minded purpose of a man who had finally found something worth keeping. The wind howled through San Francisco's streets as the city slept, unaware that a woman's entire life had just pivoted on the edge of a blade. The snow fell silent against the windows of her apartment at midnight. 2 garbage bags sat on the kitchen floor, already stuffed with everything Emma and Lucas owned. Their winter coats. 3 pairs of shoes between them. A stuffed rabbit with 1 ear missing. The children slept on the mattress in the next room, their breathing the only sound in the darkness. Nora Morgan stood at the kitchen counter, her hands trembling as she folded the letter one more time. The paper was thin from being read and reread. She had written it at 2 in the morning, when the weight of everything, the foreclosure, Douglas's threats, the $85,000 she could never repay, had finally crushed through her ability to stay. Dear Aleandro, the letter began. By the time you read this, we will be gone. She looked at the envelope, already stamped, already addressed. The post office would get it tomorrow morning before she caught the 7 a.m. bus to Portland. A new city. A shelter. A place where Douglas could not find her. A place where she could finally stop dragging a Mafia boss's mercy into the wreckage of her life. 3 soft knocks came at the door. Nora's entire body went rigid. Her hand moved to the pepper spray in her pocket before she remembered that Douglas was gone. She had heard his screams in the parking garage. She had heard the federal agents reading him his rights. She had heard the metal clink of handcuffs closing around wrists that had raised a hand to her face more times than she could count. She opened the door 3 inches. Aleandro Caruso stood in the hallway, snowflakes melting on his dark coat, holding her letter in one hand like it was made of glass. Behind him, the San Francisco night stretched cold and infinite. Behind her, the apartment held everything she had left in the world. You weren't going to say goodbye in person. His voice was quiet. Hurt lived beneath the control. How did you? Sergio saw you at the post office. He brought me the letter before you could mail it. He stepped inside without asking, closing the door gently so the children would not wake. The hallway light fell across his face, illuminating the scar that ran from his eye to his cheekbone. You wrote that you are too broken to save. Nora's breath came shallow. I am. No. He moved toward the counter, each step deliberate, a man who had spent 20 years learning how to enter a room and change its temperature just by existing in it. You are the woman who saved my mother without thinking. Who performed CPR on strangers in hospital corridors. Who works 2 shifts to feed her children. That is not broken. That is the strongest person I have ever met. Tears spilled down her face without warning. Douglas said. Douglas is gone. You will never see him again. The police will protect him. They always protect him. The corrupt ones are arrested. Federal charges. Their precinct is being investigated by the FBI. The rest will not bother you. He pulled a document from his coat pocket and set it on the counter. A cashier's check. Made out to the mortgage company. $85,000. Nora could not look at it. She could not let her eyes confirm what her mind was refusing to believe. I can't take this. I can't accept. It is not charity. His voice dropped lower, raw at the edges, something human breaking through the carefully constructed walls. It is what you are owed for saving my mother's life. For being brave when everyone else walked past you like you were invisible. He stepped closer. The space between them disappeared into something that felt like a confession. You wrote in that letter that meeting me made you feel seen. You have no idea what you did to me. I have spent 20 years building walls, and you walked through them in one night because you did not see a monster. You saw someone, son. His hand came up to her face, his thumb wiping away tears. I will not let you disappear. Not now. Not ever again. Nora broke open completely then. Her body shook with sobs that had been waiting 2 decades to be released, for every time she had been told she was worthless, for every night she had counted pennies instead of sleeping, for every moment she had believed that love and violence were the same thing because that was all she had ever known. Aleandro held her against his chest like she was something precious and fragile. His men would never recognize the man standing in this small apartment, holding a woman who had nothing but somehow owned everything that mattered. His mother would later tell him that this was the moment he stopped being her son who built empires from fear. This was the moment he became a man capable of being loved. The snow continued falling outside. 6 months later, autumn had turned to spring, and everything had shifted beneath her feet like tectonic plates rearranging the world. Nora Morgan lived in a renovated apartment 3 blocks from the bay. Not a mansion, she had been very clear about that. She did not want to live in a castle. She wanted to live in a place that felt like home. Warm. Safe. With a park across the street where children laughed without the sound of fear underneath their joy. She worked as a hospital administrator now, a position Aleandro had arranged through legitimate business connections, people he had introduced her to as someone remarkable. She was good at the work in a way that surprised her. She had spent so long being afraid that she had never realized she was also competent. Intelligent. Worthy of employment that paid more than tips left by strangers at the end of a shift. Emma and Lucas were thriving. Emma had made the soccer team. Lucas had learned to read above grade level. They called Aleandro Mr. Caruso still, though lately she had heard Emma asking her friends, "Do you have someone who comes visit and brings books and sits with you when you're scared?" Maria Caruso, Aleandro's mother, treated her like a daughter, the real kind, not the grateful kind. She baked bread on Sunday mornings and left half of it on Nora's doorstep. She took Emma and Lucas to the aquarium when Nora had late shifts. She had seen her son cry for the first time in 40 years, and she had recognized the moment as a blessing. A woman had shown him that being broken was not the same as being unworthy of love. One evening in April, Nora found Aleandro sitting on the bench outside her building, watching Emma and Lucas chase each other through the park. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She sat beside him, leaving enough space that their shoulders almost touched. "You are thinking too loud," she said. He smiled, an expression his men said they had never witnessed before. Nora changed the architecture of his entire being. "I was thinking about my father. How he taught me that love and violence were the same thing. How I believed that for 30 years. He turned to look at her. His dark eyes held something that had not been there before, not softness exactly, but acceptance. Permission to be human. "Then you showed me they are not the same thing at all." "You showed yourself," Nora said. "I just gave you a reason." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It was dark blue, expensive, the kind of thing that had been made by someone who understood that some moments required perfection. He opened it. Inside, a diamond caught the last light of the day and threw it back in 1,000 directions. "Nora Morgan, will you?" "Yes," she said. She did not need to hear the question. She already knew the answer had been written into her heart the moment a man had stood in her apartment at midnight and told her she was not invisible. He slid the ring onto her finger, and in that moment, the snow from 6 months ago now replaced by spring blossoms, the children laughing, the city lights beginning to glow as darkness arrived, 2 broken people who had collided at the exact moment when survival became something far more complicated than staying alive had finally arrived at the place they were always meant to be. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. Not because it fixes everything. Not because it erases the past or redeems all the wounds that came before. But because it reminds us that we are worth saving. And that the strongest thing we can do is let someone save us back. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. We bring you stories of second chances, redemption, and love that breaks through darkness every single day. Drop a comment and tell us what resonated most. Tell us about a moment when someone saw you when you thought you were invisible. And remember this, you are never too broken to be loved. See you in the next story.